Bleach is one of the most popular anime in the world, being a part of the generation-defining trio that took over internationally in popularity in the early 2000s. Later coined by fans as the Big Three. Bleach, like many other shows, is not a stranger to loads of games using its license to wealth, varying degrees of quality. However, at a certain point of Bleach's lifespan, when it comes to console games, it stopped altogether. For 15 years, Bleach has been without a proper console game, and the fans were starved. It felt as though this behemoth of a franchise was being slowly forgotten in the subconscious of the majority. However, there are still people out there that prayed for Bleach's return to the public eye. Then, in 2021, the trailer for the 1000-Year Blood War anime appeared at Jump Festa, giving fans finally what they wanted from Shonen Jump. The full story of Bleach was finally going to be animated, and all was well. Bleach's popularity was rejuvenated, and of course that means one thing. A new game for Bleach was on the horizon, and that game was Bleach, Rebirth of Souls. Bleach Rebirth of Souls is a 3D fighting game developed by Tamsoft that covers the events of the story from the Substitute Soul Reaper arc all the way to the end of the Battle of the Karakura Town arc. This game is a bit different from other arena fighters in the way the movements seem to be more restricted to side steps, forward dash, and back dashing as the primary way to get around in the game. The gameplay is a departure from the norm established by the Ninja Storm and Budokai Tenkaichi series, for better or for worse on a case-by-case basis. The game has a couple of modes to choose from, such as story mode, online battle mode, and of course training mode. Whilst this game doesn't have a ton of variety in the ways you interact with the game, it is not lacking in the content department. The story of Bleach is told in great detail in this game, with even some extra bells and whistles attached to it as well, which makes sense considering Taide Kubo, who is the mangaka of the series, involvement with this game. As a longtime fan, there's a lot to love here. The dedication to actually getting most, if not all, serious fights within the story mode was honestly pretty shocking considering how anime games tend to leave some things out for the sake of budget constraints. I mean shit, if someone told me they would actually spend time having you play Chad against the Primavera Spada, I would have laughed in your face because we all know that Bleach loves to do everything but focus on that genre. So the 5 Chad fans are gonna love this game, but I digress. For the uninformed, Bleach is about a teenage boy named Ichigo who gains spiritual powers from the Shinigami, Rukia, in order to protect his family and friends from the threat of the Hollows. A chance encounter on the surface, but in actuality, the start of a mastermind's grand quest to ascend to godhood. This game breaks up the story into 5 substantial chapters: the Substitute Soul Reaper arc, Soul Society arc, Visored arc, the Wakamunda arc, and the Battle for Karakura arc. The story mode has you go through a particular pathway down the narrative timeline until you either hit a block, which forces the player to do the other branching path in order to progress further in the narrative tree. Some of the nodes possess only cutscenes to establish the events that are taking place and typically where a lot of the context of the story happens. Also appreciate that they actually put in the major character moments in here besides just the fights like many other anime games tend to. They really try to earnestly adapt the story without reducing it to a shoddy Cliff Notes versions of itself. Another thing that I appreciate is that during the Visor section of the game, they had a lot of different slice-of-life moments inserted in that shows the Soul Reapers and characters from the world of the living getting into various stupid situations that does a good job showing a new side of these characters. I mean, Mayuri cheating in a board game, Byakuya learning to play soccer, and Rukia interviewing her brother for the Women's Association magazine were some of the highlights for me. Another one of the things that the game gets right is the openings and the aesthetics of the UI. The fact that this game has 3 different opening animations is a huge plus to me because I feel something is missing if an anime licensed game doesn't have a banger intro. The visuals are striking and really does a good job in representing the style of this series. The models and the animations of attacks look really vibrant in this game and reflects some of Kubo's later art style change, which makes some characters look a bit different from what they originally did in that point of the anime. One of the things I'm not fond of when it comes to the story though is the lack of cinematic cutscenes in the fights or dialogue sections. Typically we see the characters talking to each other statically or while there is movement and such. There isn't much in the way of animation when it comes to the actual clashing that takes place in these scenes. This can make the aforementioned details of the story I praised earlier feel a bit monotonous due to the presentation at times, which is a shame because I feel like if we had some of CC2's cinematics or QTEs in some of these encounters or big moments, it can elevate the game to a higher state for me. As much as I enjoy Renji walking around like he has shit in his pants, I would prefer to see a bit of an upgrade to animation when it comes to these story animations. I know this is their first game, so some corners had to be cut, but the visuals when it comes to this aspect is noticeable due to how high quality a lot of other aspects in this game is, so it is a bit jarring. At least there is a cool part of the story mode called Real Moments, where essentially you perform these particular missions in the fights to have a cutscene play, similar to how Ninja Storm had secret actions. This game also has a mode called Secret Story, which lets you play extra missions in the perspective of the side characters who did not have a focus at certain points of the main story. It gives you further insight to the characters, and considering this was approved by Kubo, it is definitely worth looking at. As I stated before, Bleach Rebirth of Souls is a 3D 1v1 fighting game, but it is quite a bit different from its anime arena contemporaries. This game has quite a few mechanics that makes it a bit different from the pack, but it has some similarities that fans of these games can come to expect. This game, like I said previously, uses a movement system more akin to a traditional style of 3D movement such as Soul Calibur, Tekken, or a Virtua Fighter. However, the nuances of these things are obviously different from game to game. It is closer to these styles of fighters than, say, a My Heroes 1 Justice. Each character in the game possesses 2 different special moves, a signature move, an awakening, and these stock removing moves called the Kikon moves. These are essentially super attacks that take place after you hit your opponent with your Kikon attack, which can strip your opponent of their stocks when their Reishi gauge is 30% or lower. The intrigue of this game comes in the way characters achieve the hits through the different personal mechanics they have. They commit to the unique nature of the anime and have the characters reflect that in their moveset, by often giving them gimmicks that would remind somebody of an Arc System Works game to achieve the common goal of depleting the Reishi gauge. This is where the game shines the best in my opinion, because a lot of the depth in this game can be attributed to these gimmicks, as the combo system is rather limited in its current iteration. Just to show an example of one of the more creative characters would be Psylocke Grants. How he wins his matches is by collecting Rokureichu by hitting people with his command grabs and collecting data so he can power up his attacks and weaken the opponent as well. Depending on how much you can gain, you can even revive from death twice due to the amount of Rokureichu you collected, which is pretty sick. Then of course we have the Awakenings, and man, these are the coolest parts of the game to me. A lot of the Awakenings either change your moveset, power you up, or completely warp the field around you. I am a huge fan of Tosen's Bankai due to the absolute gall of them to make most of the screen basically invisible, just like the show. Most matches will feature both players awakening into their powered up forms, so these game-changing transformations are a common occurrence. They even serve as a bit of a get-off-me tool as they push the other player away and become invul during the process. Whilst all these things are exciting on paper, there are some caveats to my positivity here. The game has huge restrictive issues with the combo game across the board. It often feels like you have to fight against the system and use a lot of metered options to get solid offense going, but it actively takes away from your ability to defend or play neutral with Vanish. In a lot of games, this could lead to some more keen meter management, but oftentimes in this game, it makes certain characters a complete bore due to their lack of options. This can create a huge disparity when it comes to damage, and sometimes make certain characters such as Bankai Ichigo a menace to society. Personally, I think characters like Bankai Ichigo should be the standard for the combo structure in the game, or at least get close to it in some way because he actually has practical ways to extend his turn. When it comes to this game, I don't want to go over the balance too heavily since it is a game that is undergoing changes and patches at a high rate. So this can change later. For instance, this game used to have an abundance of infinites, but the team patched it out relatively quickly. Speaking of patches, I would have to say the launch of the game was quite rocky. In terms of Steam, there were quite a few issues on launch that prevented people from playing the game for any extended amount of time. Crashes, lack of audio, unless run from administrator, to name a few. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that the online is decent at best, and at its worst, it can be quite a laggy experience, possibly due to the use of delay-based netcode, which ultimately will continue to plague anime games for a long time. I would also like to mention that this game lacks lobbies and also ranked match, which are staples for pretty much every single fighting game, casual or not. I don't think this game is necessarily made to be like a Street Fighter or a Tekken in terms of competitive integrity, but it's always nice to be able to test your skills against people who want to take things a bit more seriously. The game also allows you to use these passive items called the Soul Crystals that you can pick up from Urahara shop. If I am being honest, I am not a fan of really altering my character's capabilities like this when I'm playing with friends because I feel certain upgrades feels egregious on certain characters. Other than that, you can use the shot to buy talismans for the main story fights and some decals for your online battle profile in the game. Bleach Rebirth of Souls is definitely a fun game that has a solid foundation to be improved upon in a follow-up title. I think the game definitely has the power to get people into Bleach and make fans of the franchise happy with how it portrays its characters and exudes style. However, there is a lot of jankiness that mars some of the presentation that can be fixed with the sequel. The combat also possesses a solid base with some not so great execution at times, but it is an exciting first step with what I can assume will be the start of a great franchise. With that said, the next time I cover Bleach on this channel might be the core 4 of the 1000 Year Blood War anime. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.